Subscribe now, because what you're about to read will prove that sometimes the smallest act of honesty can unlock the biggest doors. A struggling waitress working 3 jobs to support her sick father notices a billionaire's Japanese tattoo contains an embarrassing mistake. She could stay quiet and keep serving him. After all, he's rich, powerful, and could make her life difficult. But she chooses truth over safety, and that single moment of courage launches a chain of events that will transform her from barely surviving to thriving beyond her wildest dreams. This story has career breakthrough, family devotion, unexpected romance, jealous exes trying to sabotage everything, and an ending so satisfying you'll believe that integrity really is the ultimate currency. Don't miss a single word of this incredible journey from working-class struggle to corporate success to finding love with the last person she ever expected. Early autumn greeted Chicago residents with unexpected sunshine. Brooklyn Lawson, a 26-year-old waitress working at an elegant restaurant called The Fountain in the Gold Coast neighborhood, was starting her shift. Her long auburn hair hung down her slender shoulders. She constantly had to adjust it while working. She wore an elegant black uniform that emphasized her slender figure. During the day, the restaurant filled up slowly. Tourists with cameras and businessmen with laptops occupied table after table. Brooklyn moved between them with grace and professionalism she'd developed over 5 years of work. No one suspected that in addition to English, she spoke fluent Japanese, the result of her fascination with cherry blossom culture and 3 years of East Asian studies at Northwestern University, which she'd had to abandon for financial reasons. "Brooklyn, you've got table number 7, whispered her shift manager, Donna, a woman in her 50s with short blonde hair. "Some important guy just arrived in a limousine." Brooklyn nodded and quickly fixed her hair, smoothing her apron. She moved toward the indicated table where a man sat in an impeccably tailored navy blue suit. At first glance, she estimated he was about 35 years old. Looking at him discreetly, she noticed that despite his elegant outfit, there was something casual about him, maybe because of his slightly long dark hair, or maybe because of the tattoo whose fragment protruded above his shirt collar. "Good afternoon. Welcome to the Fountain," she said in a professional tone, placing the menu in front of him. "May I offer you our wine list?" The man looked up from his phone. He had intensely blue eyes that watched her for a moment with curiosity before answering. "I'd like the best red wine you have," he said in a deep voice with a slight smile. "I rely on your recommendation." Brooklyn nodded. "I recommend Chateau Margaux, vintage 2010. It's a French wine with a deep bouquet featuring notes of blackcurrant and violets." "Perfect choice," he confirmed, and a flash of recognition appeared in his eyes. "I'd like a glass. Maybe you could also recommend something to eat." Over the next few minutes, Brooklyn discussed the chef's specialties with professionalism, feeling the man's inquisitive gaze on her. When he finally decided on an exquisite filet mignon with truffles, she left to assemble the order. "Who is this guy?" she whispered to Donna, handing the order card to the cook through the kitchen window. Donna looked around. Conspiratorially, "You don't know? That's Marcus Olson, the developer. He has his own construction company specializing in luxury apartment buildings. They say he's worth several $100 million. Brooklyn raised her eyebrows. The name actually felt familiar from newspapers and internet articles. When she served the wine, and then the exquisite steak with professional courtesy, something in his manner made her feel he wasn't entirely comfortable. It wasn't anything unpleasant. On the contrary, he was polite, but self-confident in a way that was slightly intimidating. While he ate, she caught him watching her several times. When she came over to ask if everything tasted good, his shirt moved slightly, revealing a larger part of the tattoo on his collarbone. She saw clearly Japanese kanji characters. As a former East Asian studies student, she automatically read the visible fragment and frowned slightly before she could control her reaction. Marcus noticed immediately. "Something wrong?" he asked, looking at her penetratingly. Brooklyn blushed slightly. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have been staring like that." She hesitated. "I know a bit of Japanese and I noticed your tattoo." Marcus smiled broadly, putting down his knife and fork. He pulled back his collar slightly, showing the full tattoo. "This is my life motto," he said proudly. "It supposedly means strength and honor. I had it done in Tokyo during a business trip 2 years ago." Brooklyn bit her lip. In fact, the characters were arranged into a completely different meaning. For a moment, she wondered whether she should tell him. A customer, especially a wealthy one, shouldn't be embarrassed or corrected. "It's interesting," she replied diplomatically, pouring more water into his glass. Marcus narrowed his eyes as if sensing she wasn't telling the whole truth. "You know Japanese?" he asked with interest. "I studied East Asian studies for 3 years," she admitted. "I had to stop, but I still study on my own." "Fascinating," he said, looking at her with new interest. "So, what does my tattoo really mean?" Brooklyn felt her cheeks burning. She hadn't expected this direct question. "Do you really want to know?" she asked quietly. "Of course," he confirmed without taking his eyes off her. Brooklyn looked around discreetly, making sure none of the guests were listening. "These characters don't mean strength and honor," she said quietly. "It actually says, 'Fool pays double.'" For a moment, disbelief crossed Marcus's face. Brooklyn was already preparing herself for an outburst of anger, or at least signs of embarrassment. Much to her surprise, the man suddenly burst out laughing, a deep, genuine laugh that made several guests turn to look. "Damn," he said, still laughing. "That bastard at the Tokyo tattoo parlor tricked me. I paid him a fortune for this." Brooklyn couldn't help but smile seeing his reaction. "I'm sorry I had to be the bearer of bad news," she said with a hint of amusement in her voice. "Don't be sorry," he replied, shaking his head with disbelief. "You just saved me from continuing to make a fool of myself. Imagine how many times I've bragged about this tattoo in front of Japanese business partners." This thought triggered another wave of laughter, which Brooklyn joined this time, though she tried to remain professional. "They were probably too polite to say anything," she commented, unable to suppress her smile. Marcus looked at her with a mixture of amusement and, admiration. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly. "Brooklyn Lawson," she replied, somewhat surprised by the directness of the question. "Marcus Olson," he introduced himself, stretching out his hand. "I know," she said, shaking his hand. She immediately regretted her answer, which sounded like she followed celebrities. "I mean, my manager mentioned you're a famous developer, so my reputation precedes me," he said with an amused twinkle in his eye. "Tell me, Brooklyn, what's an East Asian studies student doing working as a waitress? Don't get me wrong, you're an excellent waitress." But still, her answer was simple. Money. Not everyone can afford to complete their studies, especially when your father is ill. Her answer was honest, without a shade of resentment or bitterness. Marcus nodded with understanding. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked." "It's okay," she replied with a smile. "May I bring you anything else? Perhaps dessert?" The conversation returned to professional tracks, though the atmosphere between them had changed. Marcus ordered tiramisu and espresso, and while he enjoyed his dessert, Brooklyn served other guests, feeling his gaze on her. There's something intriguing about this, but also intimidating. A millionaire interested in an ordinary waitress. This sounds like the beginning of a cheap romance novel, she thought ironically. When it came time for payment, Marcus handed her his credit card and a business card. "If you're ever looking for work that will allow you to use your knowledge of Japanese, call me," he said. "I do business with several Japanese companies, and I always need people who know the language and culture." Brooklyn hesitated, holding the elegant black business card. "Thank you, but I'm not looking for a job," she answered honestly. "Take it anyway," he insisted with a smile. "You never know." Brooklyn nodded and put the business card in her apron pocket. As Marcus was leaving, he turned around at the door and waved to her, causing a wave of whispers among the other employees. "What did Olson want from you?" Donna asked as soon as the millionaire disappeared through the door. "I told him his Japanese tattoo doesn't mean what he thought," Brooklyn replied, still processing the entire encounter. "And how did he react?" "With laughter. And then he gave me his business card." Donna whistled softly. "Interesting. He usually comes here with models or business partners. I've never seen him show that kind of interest in any staff member." Brooklyn shrugged, trying to hide how much this information intrigued her. "He probably just appreciated that I saved him from making more of a fool of himself," she said, returning to work. But for the rest of the day, she couldn't stop thinking about those intense blue eyes and Marcus Olson's genuine laughter. The business card in her pocket seemed heavy, reminding her of this unusual meeting. After her shift ended, Brooklyn got on the bus that took her to a small, apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. She rented it with her father, a retired history teacher who'd been struggling with Parkinson's disease for 3 years. It was her father's illness that had forced her to interrupt her studies and take up full-time work. When she got home, she found her father sitting in an armchair in front of the TV. Despite the disease, Theodore Lawson remained sharp-minded with a good sense of humor. "How was your day, sweetheart?" he asked, as she leaned forward to kiss him on the cheek. "Interesting," she replied, sitting on the couch next to him. "I met a millionaire today with a tattoo containing a mistake in Japanese." She told her father the whole story, making him laugh. "So what? Will you call him?" he asked when she finished. Brooklyn shook her head. "Dad, he's a millionaire. Such people live in another world. He's probably already forgotten about me by the time he got into his limousine." Theodore looked at her with a wise smile. "And yet he gave you his business card." And he laughed instead of getting angry. "That says something about him." Brooklyn rolled her eyes but smiled. She pulled the business card from her pocket and looked at it. Elegant, minimalist design with the company name Olson Investments and a mobile number. She put it on the table. "We'll see what fate brings," she said, getting up to prepare dinner. She didn't know yet how much this chance meeting would change her life. She also didn't know that Marcus Olson, sitting in his limousine, had just Googled Brooklyn Lawson and was smiling at his phone screen, finding her profile on social media with a photo she'd taken during a Japanese culture festival. That night, Brooklyn lay in bed having difficulty falling asleep. Thoughts about meeting Marcus kept floating around in her head, and her imagination suggested various scenarios where their paths would cross again. On one hand, the rational part of her mind said it was just one of many days, one of many meetings at the restaurant. On the other hand, something in the way he'd looked at her, in his genuine laughter and unexpected proposal, made her heart beat a little faster just thinking about it. She knew she'd laugh at herself in the morning. Meanwhile, she put the business card in her bedside drawer, promising herself she'd forget about it tomorrow. However, fate had completely different plans for Brooklyn and Marcus. 1 week later, a week after meeting Marcus Olson, Brooklyn's life returned to its usual rhythm. Mornings, she spent helping her father with exercises recommended by the physical therapist. Afternoons and evenings, she worked at the restaurant, and in the few free moments, she returned to independent Japanese study. The millionaire's business card still sat in her bedside drawer, though Brooklyn caught herself thinking about it more and more often. It was Friday, the busiest day at the fountain. Brooklyn was serving 4 tables simultaneously, efficiently, navigating between orders, bills, and special guest requests. She didn't even notice when an elegant middle-aged woman entered, dressed in a fashionable gray suit. Only when Donna approached with a mysterious smile did Brooklyn's attention return to her surroundings. "This lady wants to talk to you," the manager said, pointing discreetly at the stranger sitting at the bar. Brooklyn frowned, not recognizing the woman. "Are you sure it's me she wants?" "Absolutely. She asked specifically for Brooklyn Lawson," Donna confirmed. "Go ahead. I'll take over your tables." With a mixture of curiosity and anxiety, Brooklyn approached the bar. The woman watched her carefully, and as the waitress approached, she stood and extended her hand. "Ms. Brooklyn, my name is Elizabeth Novak. I'm Mr. Marcus Olson's assistant," she introduced herself, shaking hands with a confident, professional grip. "Mr. Olson asked me to extend an invitation to you." Brooklyn felt her cheeks turn slightly red. So he hadn't forgotten about her. "An invitation?" she repeated, trying to keep her voice neutral. Elizabeth reached into her elegant bag and pulled out an envelope embossed with Marcus's logo. "Tomorrow evening there's an opening ceremony for our newest project, Cherry Blossom Apartments," she explained, handing over the envelope. "It's an apartment complex inspired by Japanese aesthetics. Mr. Olson feels your knowledge of Japanese culture could be extremely valuable during meetings with investors from Tokyo who will be present at the opening." Brooklyn took the envelope, not knowing what to say. The proposal was unexpected and strangely formal for what had seemed like innocent flirting in a restaurant. "Is this a business invitation?" she asked directly. Elizabeth smiled slightly. "Mr. Olson mentioned you have unique linguistic competencies that could be useful when speaking with Japanese guests. Of course, we offer standard compensation for this type of consulting service," she explained in a professional tone. "All details are in the envelope." Brooklyn nodded, still somewhat dazed. "Thank you. I'll think about it. Mr. Olson would be very pleased if you accepted the invitation," Elizabeth added, then nodded goodbye and left the restaurant, leaving Brooklyn with the envelope in hand and mixed feelings. Donna immediately appeared next to her, not hiding her curiosity. "Well, what was that about?" she asked excitedly. "I received an invitation to the opening of Olson's new project," Brooklyn replied, still processing what had just happened. "Apparently they need someone who knows Japanese." "Didn't I tell you?" Donna exclaimed triumphantly. "You caught his eye. You have to go." Brooklyn put the envelope in her apron pocket. "It's just work. They'll probably pay me to help with Japanese investors," though her heart beat a little faster at the thought of seeing Marcus again. When she came home that evening, she sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. Inside, she found an elegant invitation for the Cherry Blossom Apartments opening, which was to take place the next day at 6 p.m., and a short handwritten note. "Dear Brooklyn, I would be honored if you would join us at the Cherry Blossom Apartments opening. Your knowledge of Japanese language and culture would be invaluable during meetings with our Tokyo partners. Of course, I understand this is a sudden request, which is why I'm offering $2,000 for an evening of work. If you decide to accept the invitation, my driver will pick you up at 5:30 p.m. from your address. Kind regards, Marcus Olson. P.S. I'm still wondering if I should remove that unfortunate tattoo." Also attached to the invitation was a check for $2,000. Brooklyn looked at it with disbelief. It was equivalent to her weekly salary at the restaurant. "What have you got there, sweetheart?" Theodore asked, entering the kitchen. Brooklyn showed him the invitation and recounted her conversation with Marcus's assistant. "And what are you going to do?" her father asked, watching her carefully. Brooklyn sighed, running her fingers through her hair. "I don't know. On one hand, it's a good opportunity to earn extra money. On the other hand, this is all so strange. A millionaire I met once in my life sends his assistant with an invitation and a check." Theodore smiled gently. "Maybe the boy just really liked you," he said, "and at the same time found a practical use for your skills. Two birds with one stone. Dad, he's not a boy. He's a businessman worth hundreds of millions," Brooklyn protested, though she couldn't help but smile at the thought of how Marcus would react to the term boy. "And you're an intelligent, beautiful woman who speaks Japanese," Theodore replied simply. "In my opinion, you should go. What do you have to lose?" Brooklyn stayed up late that night, weighing all the pros and cons. Ultimately, she decided she would accept the invitation. After all, it was just one evening's work, and the money would really come in handy. The next morning, she called the number given in the invitation to confirm her attendance, then spent several hours going through her closet looking for appropriate attire. Ultimately, she decided on a simple black cocktail dress she'd bought on sale years earlier and had only worn once at her cousin's wedding. She accessorized it with delicate silver earrings inherited from her mother and low heels. When she stood at 5:25 p.m. in front of the mirror in the hallway, Theodore looked at her with fatherly pride. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Your mom would be so proud of you." Brooklyn felt tears welling up in her eyes. She leaned forward to hug her father. "Thanks, Dad. Don't stay up too late with Henry," she said, referring to the neighbor Theodore had planned a chess evening with. At 5:30 p.m. sharp, a black Mercedes with tinted windows stopped in front of their building. An elegant driver in a suit got out and opened the door for her. "Ma'am, I'm Adam, Mr. Olson's driver," he introduced himself politely. The journey through Chicago's crowded streets passed quickly. Brooklyn watched through the window as neighborhoods changed, increasingly elegant and well-maintained, until finally the car stopped in front of an impressive modern building. The Cherry Blossom Apartments were stunning. The glass facade reflected the last rays of the setting sun, and a red carpet was laid out in front of the entrance. A crowd of elegantly dressed guests was already gathering at the entrance, where hostesses in kimonos welcomed arrivals. Brooklyn felt a sudden surge of uncertainty. What was she actually doing here? She was an ordinary waitress who'd interrupted her studies and now had to step into an exclusive party full of millionaires and business people. But before she could develop these thoughts further, the car door opened and Marcus Olson himself stood before her. He looked even more elegant than in the restaurant, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. His dark hair was carefully combed, and his intense blue eyes brightened when he saw her. "Brooklyn," he said with a smile, extending his hand to help her out of the car. "I'm so glad you decided to come." His handshake was warm and firm, and when Brooklyn stood next to him, she smelled the light scent of his exclusive cologne. "Thank you for inviting me," she replied, trying to make her voice sound professional. "Though I have to admit I feel a little out of place." Marcus smiled, and there was a warm gleam in his eyes. "You have absolutely no reason to," he said, then added more quietly, "especially me." Before Brooklyn could answer, Marcus offered her his arm and led her to the entrance. "Let me give you some context," he said as they walked the red carpet, attracting looks from other guests. Among the invited guests is a delegation from Japan, Takeda Properties, with whom we're collaborating on this project. Their CEO, Kenji Nakamura, doesn't speak very good English, and I, as you know, have limited knowledge of Japanese. Brooklyn couldn't help but smile at the memory of his unfortunate tattoo. "I promise I won't mention the tattoo," she said with a note of humor in her voice. Marcus laughed quietly. "I appreciate it. Though after a week I still can't believe I walked around with that character on my collarbone for years. It's a miracle." "None of my Japanese partners told me the truth. In Japanese culture, direct confrontation is considered rude," Brooklyn explained. "They probably thought telling you the truth would embarrass you, and you had no such reservations," he noted with amusement. "I'm sorry. If I'd known you were an important businessman, I probably wouldn't have said it either," she admitted honestly. "And that's why I appreciate you," he replied, looking at her intensely. When they entered the impressive lobby of the building, Brooklyn stopped for a moment, admiring the space. The interior was decorated in minimalist Japanese style with wooden elements, stone, and lush greenery. Traditional Japanese flower arrangements called ikebana were everywhere, and delicate music played on the koto, a traditional Japanese stringed instrument, sounded in the background. "This is beautiful," she said honestly. "Who designed the interiors?" "We hired Japanese designer Yuki Tanaka," Marcus replied proudly. "It was important to me that everything be authentic." As they went deeper into the party, Marcus introduced Brooklyn to subsequent guests, business people, architects, journalists. Everyone looked at her curiously, clearly wondering who the young woman at Olsen's side was. Brooklyn felt somewhat awkward, but tried to behave confidently. Finally, they approached a group of Japanese people talking at the bar. At their head was an elderly man with gray hair and sharp eyes. "Mr. Nakamura," Marcus said in English, then turned to Brooklyn. "Brooklyn, could you introduce us in Japanese?" Brooklyn nodded and turned to the Japanese guests in their language. "Nakamura-san, konbanwa. Watashi wa Brooklyn Lawson desu. Kochira wa Marcus Olsen-san desu. Sakura Apartments no Kaihatsusha desu." The older man's eyes widened in astonishment when he heard fluent Japanese. He replied with a broad smile, and Brooklyn translated for Marcus. "Mr. Nakamura says he's delighted with your project and admires your attention to Japanese details. He's also impressed that you hired someone who speaks Japanese." For the next hour, Brooklyn served as translator, helping Marcus and the Japanese investors communicate more freely. She noticed her presence clearly improved the atmosphere. The Japanese felt more comfortable expressing themselves in their own language, and Marcus could present his visions and plans more precisely. At one point, when the conversation moved to more general topics, Brooklyn noticed Marcus watching her from the side with a difficult-to-read expression. When their eyes met, he smiled at her. Not the professional smile he directed at other guests, but something more personal, warmer. The evening progressed, and Brooklyn started to feel more comfortable. The Japanese guests seemed to like her, and she herself was happy for the opportunity to practice the language. Marcus never left her side, always close, always attentive, sometimes placing his hand on her back as he led her through the crowd. When the official part of the evening came to an end, and most guests dispersed throughout the building for apartment demonstrations, Marcus suggested, "Maybe I'll show you the best apartment. It's on the top floor with a view of all of Chicago." Brooklyn hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "With pleasure," she replied with a smile. The silent private elevator took them to the 20th floor, the highest floor of Cherry Blossom Apartments. Brooklyn stood next to Marcus, feeling slight tension between them. Throughout the evening, she'd managed to behave professionally, focusing on her role as translator. But now that they were alone, she felt that strange electric feeling of attraction again. "You did great," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "Mr. Nakamura was very impressed. He told me your Japanese is almost perfect with a hint of charming accent." Brooklyn smiled, feeling her cheeks heat up slightly. "Thank you. I haven't had so many opportunities to speak Japanese in a long time. It was refreshing." "It was obvious you loved it," Marcus noted, looking at her from the side. "Your eyes sparkled when you talked to them. Why exactly did you interrupt your studies?" Brooklyn sighed quietly. "My father got sick with Parkinson's 3 years ago," she explained. "He's a retired teacher, so his pension barely covers medications. I had to start working full-time." Marcus nodded with understanding. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked. It's a personal matter." "No, it's okay," she replied honestly. "It's not a secret. It's just life." Before he could answer, the elevator stopped, and the doors opened directly into a spacious apartment. Brooklyn held her breath as she entered. Walls from floor to ceiling were glazed, offering a breathtaking view of Chicago's night panorama. The city spread out beneath them like a sea of lights, with Willis Tower towering above the center. The interior was decorated in minimalist Japanese style: low furniture, natural materials, subdued colors. In the middle of the living room was a traditional Japanese low table surrounded by cushions instead of chairs. In the corner stood an authentic futon, and in another corner, a small fountain with a bamboo ladle filled the space with the soothing sound of flowing water. "This is the show apartment," Marcus explained, watching her reaction. "Designed specifically for lovers of Japanese culture." "It's beautiful," Brooklyn replied, walking up to the window. "I've never seen Chicago from this perspective." Marcus stood next to her, also looking at the city skyline. Neither said anything for a quiet moment. "Though I've seen this view hundreds of times during construction, somehow I never had time to really focus on looking at it," he said. They stood there for a moment in silence, admiring the twinkling lights. "Would you like something to drink?" he asked finally. "I have premium sake here, specially imported from Japan for today's occasion." "With pleasure," Brooklyn replied. Marcus approached an elegantly hidden bar and pulled out a bottle of sake and 2 small ceramic cups. He poured the drink and handed 1 cup to Brooklyn. "To new acquaintances," he said, raising his cup in a toast. "To new acquaintances," she repeated, gently tapping her cup against his. The sake was delicate, with a hint of cherry blossom, much better than any she'd drunk before. As they savored the drink, Marcus asked, "Do you really think I should remove this tattoo?" Brooklyn looked at him, and the corner of her mouth lifted in a slight smile. "Honestly, yes, but there will probably be a scar." Marcus laughed, tilting his head back. "Sincerity again. I appreciate it. Most people I know would say something like, 'It's part of your history,' or 'It makes you unique.' Well, you have plenty of unique features without a tattoo saying 'a fool pays twice,'" she replied with a hint of humor in her voice. "You're right," he admitted, touching the spot where the tattoo was hidden under his shirt. "But you know what? There's something poetically just about it. I was arrogant enough to think I could just walk into a Japanese tattoo parlor and demand something I didn't even understand." "A lesson in humility?" Brooklyn asked. "Exactly," he confirmed, filling their cups again. "Speaking of lessons," he hesitated for a moment. "I have a proposition." Brooklyn raised her eyebrows, waiting for him to continue. "As I mentioned, I work with several Japanese companies. I need someone who knows the language and culture to help me in negotiations and everyday contacts," he explained. "I'd like to offer you a part-time job as a Japanese consultant." Brooklyn blinked in surprise. "But I didn't even finish my degree." "That doesn't matter," he interrupted her. "Today I saw how great you are at this. You can translate not only words but cultural nuances. That's a rare skill." Brooklyn swallowed, processing his words. "What would the responsibilities be?" "Like?" she asked carefully. "You'd accompany me during meetings with Japanese partners, help translate documents, sometimes handle correspondence," he explained. "Usually 2 or 3 days a week, sometimes more when delegations arrive from Japan." "The compensation," he hesitated. "What would you say to $12,000 per month?" Brooklyn choked on her sake. $12,000 for part-time work? she asked in disbelief. Marcus shrugged as if it were the most obvious amount in the world. This is specialized knowledge. I pay for quality, he said simply. Brooklyn set her cup on the counter, feeling her thoughts spinning. This amount would change everything. She could provide better care for her father. Maybe even go back to college. It sounded too good to be true. Why me? She asked finally. Surely there are professional translators with degrees and experience. Marcus looked at her for a moment in silence, as if weighing his words. Because you're authentic, he finally replied. And because you told me the truth about my tattoo, even though I was a customer in your restaurant. That says a lot about your character. Their eyes met, and for a moment Brooklyn had the impression time stood still. In his blue eyes was more than just a business proposition, something that made her heart beat faster. I'll think about it, she replied quietly. This is a big change. Of course, he agreed. I don't expect an immediate answer, but I hope you'll agree. Before she could answer, his phone rang. Marcus sighed, reaching into his pocket. Sorry, I have to take this, he said, looking at the display. It's Nakamura. He walked a few steps away, speaking quietly in English. Brooklyn returned to the window, staring out at the city, trying to organize her thoughts. The proposal was amazing, but also intimidating. Could she really work for someone like Marcus Olson? And was it just about work, or something more? When Marcus finished the conversation and returned to her, his expression was more serious. I need to go back downstairs, he said with an apologetic smile. Nakamura wants to discuss a few details before leaving. Of course, Brooklyn replied. I should go home now anyway. My father will be worried. My driver will take you back, he assured her, leading her back to the elevators. And Brooklyn, think about my proposal. I will, she promised. As the elevator descended, Brooklyn felt her thoughts spinning. The evening had been like a dream. Elegant. Party. Conversations in Japanese, private penthouse, and a job offer that could change her life. And yet somewhere deep, she felt anxious. Everything was happening too fast, too perfectly. Why would a billionaire be so interested in an ordinary waitress? Was it really just about her knowledge of Japanese? Marcus on the ground floor introduced her to his assistant Elizabeth, who was to arrange her transport home. Before they said goodbye at the door, Marcus leaned forward and gently kissed Brooklyn on the cheek. Thank you for tonight, he said quietly. I'll call you. The way back passed, like in a fog. Sitting in the luxury Mercedes, Brooklyn tried to process all the events of the evening. When the car stopped in front of her building, the driver kindly opened the door for her. Can I wait for anything else, ma'am? He asked. No, thank you, she replied. Good night. Climbing the stairs to the apartment, Brooklyn could already hear the TV. Her father wasn't asleep yet. When she entered, Theodore looked away from the screen, and his face lit up with a smile. How was it, sweetheart? He asked, trying to get up from the armchair. Sit down, Dad, she said, walking over to hug him. It was intense. For the next half hour, she told her father about the party, Japanese guests, and the beautiful apartment on the top floor. However, when she came to the job offer, she hesitated. What happened? Theodore asked, noticing her uncertainty. Brooklyn sighed, sitting on the wide couch next to his chair. He offered me a job, she admitted, as a Japanese consultant. $12,000 per month for part-time work. Theodore's eyes widened in astonishment. 12,000, he repeated. That's almost 4 times what you earn at the restaurant working full-time. I know, she replied. It sounds too good to be true, right? Theodore looked at her carefully. What are you afraid of? He asked directly. Brooklyn ran her fingers through her hair, wondering how to put her doubts into words. I'm not sure what he expects from me, she admitted finally. It's all happening so quickly. A week ago, I was an ordinary waitress, and he was a customer I told had a stupid tattoo. But now he's offering me a job for a sum most people can only dream of. You think he has hidden intentions? Theodore asked carefully. Brooklyn sighed. I don't know. The whole evening was professional, but there's more to it. The way he looks at me. How do you look at him? Theodore asked, with a wise smile. Brooklyn felt her cheeks heat up. Dad, that's not the point. That's exactly the point, he interrupted her gently. Sweetheart, you're a grown woman. If you like this man, there's nothing wrong with that. But it complicates things, she protested. What if I take the job and then something goes wrong? Besides, he lives in a completely different world. He's a billionaire, Dad. And you're an intelligent, beautiful woman who knows what she wants from life. Theodore, I finished for her. And despite what you think, that might be exactly what attracted him. In his world full of people who tell him what he wants to hear, you told the truth. Brooklyn smiled slightly, remembering Marcus's almost identical words. Maybe you're right, she admitted. But it's still complicated. Life is complicated, Theodore replied philosophically. But sometimes it's worth taking a chance. Brooklyn stayed up late that night analyzing every detail of the evening. Marcus's proposal was like a dream come true, but at the same time, it made her anxious. What if it all ended in disappointment? Or worse, what if her feelings for him became deeper, while for him, it would only be a momentary whim? The next day was Saturday, and Brooklyn didn't have a shift at the restaurant. She spent the morning helping her father with his daily exercises, then went shopping. When she returned home, Theodore greeted her with a mysterious smile. "He called you," he said, pointing to the landline phone. "Who?" she asked, though her gut already knew the answer. "Your millionaire," Theodore replied with a smile. "He left his number and asked you to call back." Brooklyn set aside the shopping and took the piece of paper with the number her father had left by the phone. She hesitated for a moment, then reached for her cell phone and dialed the number. "Olson," she heard his deep voice after 2 rings. "Good morning. This is Brooklyn Lawson," she replied, trying to make her voice sound confident. "My father said you called." "Brooklyn." There was a smile in his voice. "Yes, I called to ask if you've thought about my proposal." "I'm still thinking about it," she admitted honestly. "It's a big change." "I understand," he said. "But maybe I can help you make a decision. How about lunch tomorrow? We could discuss the details." Brooklyn hesitated. Part of her wanted to agree immediately, but another part was still full of doubts. "I'm not sure," she started. "Just lunch," he assured her. "In a public place. If that will make you feel more comfortable. You can even choose the restaurant." "Okay," she agreed finally. "But I have a condition." "I'm listening." His voice sounded intrigued. "I want to understand why you're really doing this," she said directly. "Why me? You could definitely hire a professional translator with references." There was a short silence on the other end of the line. "That's a fair question," he finally admitted. "And I promise, I'll answer honestly. Tomorrow at 1 p.m.? There's a small restaurant in the Gold Coast neighborhood. The Chef's Table," she said. "I know that place," he interrupted her. "Perfect choice. See you there." When she ended the conversation, Brooklyn realized her heart was beating faster. What had she actually done? She was meeting for lunch with a millionaire who'd proposed a dream job after just 2 meetings. It sounded like a script for a cheap romantic movie, not her real life. And yet, when she looked at the card with his number, she felt strangely calm. Whatever was going to happen tomorrow, at least she'd have answers. And then, with full consciousness, she could decide on something that could change her whole life. What was supposed to happen the next day, however, she could never have predicted. Neither she nor Marcus knew yet that their meeting would be interrupted by an unexpected guest, a person who would turn their budding relationship upside down and introduce complications. Neither of them had expected. Continuing in next response. Story approximately 55% complete. Remaining sections include lunch confrontation with ex-fiancée Sophie, Marcus's explanation, Brooklyn accepting the job, 3 months of successful work and developing relationship, jealous Sophie's sabotage attempts, final confrontation, Marcus's public declaration, proposal scene, epilogue showing their life together with Brooklyn's father's improved health, and her return to finishing her degree. The lunch that changed everything. The Chef's Table restaurant was located in a historic Gold Coast building. Though inconspicuous from the outside, it was famous for delicious traditional American cuisine and cozy atmosphere. Brooklyn had chosen this place deliberately. It was elegant, but not exclusive, perfect for the conversation she planned to have. She arrived 10 minutes before the scheduled time, dressed in a simple navy blue dress and light autumn coat. The waiter led her to a table at the back of the room, away from the windows and curious glances. She sat nervously fixing her hair and looking through the menu, though she couldn't concentrate on the dishes. At exactly 1 p.m., the restaurant door opened and Marcus entered. Though he was dressed significantly less formally than during the cherry blossom opening, In dark jeans, white shirt, and navy blue jacket, he still attracted attention. He looked around the room, and when he saw Brooklyn, his face lit up with a smile. "Sorry if I'm late," he said, sitting across from her. "You're exactly on time," she replied, looking at her watch. Marcus's smile widened. "In my world, punctuality means 5 minutes early," he explained, then added, "Beautiful choice. I'm glad you like it here. My father and I used to come here for Sunday lunches when I was little," she replied, feeling the initial tension subside a bit. The waiter came over to take their order. Brooklyn chose French onion soup and chicken piccata. Marcus decided on clam chowder and ribeye steak. When the waiter left, there was a short silence. "You promised me an honest answer," Brooklyn started, gathering courage. Marcus nodded, placing his napkin on his lap. "That's right. You asked why you." "The answer is complex," he said. "We have time," she replied, looking him straight in the eye. Marcus looked at her seriously, as if weighing his words. "Okay," he started. "Part of it is about your skills, of course. What you did during the cherry blossom opening was impressive. Nakamura called me yesterday to express his appreciation for your Japanese." "Thank you, but that doesn't explain everything," Brooklyn noted. "No, it doesn't," he agreed. He hesitated for a moment, then continued. "Brooklyn, I've been building my empire for 10 years. I work 16 hours a day. I surround myself with people who are professional, competent, and predictable. Everything in my life is carefully planned and controlled." He paused when the waiter brought their soups. When they were alone again, he continued. "And then a waitress appears who without blinking tells me my Japanese tattoo I was so proud of is actually a joke. Most people around me wouldn't dare tell me the truth, even if it was obvious." Brooklyn smiled slightly. "So, you're hiring me because I told you you had a stupid tattoo?" Marcus laughed softly. "Partly," he admitted. "But there's something else. Something I noticed while watching you work with Nakamura and his people. You have a gift. You don't just know the language. You understand nuances. You can build bridges between cultures. That's a rare skill." Brooklyn felt her cheeks turn slightly red from the compliment. "That still doesn't explain why you're offering me $12,000 per month," she noted. "That's well above market rates." Marcus looked at her for a moment, as if making an internal decision. "Okay, here's the whole truth," he said finally. "You intrigue me, Brooklyn, professionally, but also personally. I'm interested in getting to know you better, and the job offer is a chance to spend more time with you in a professional context." Brooklyn felt her heart speed up. His sincere confession was disarming. "What if I say no?" she asked quietly. "Then I'll ask if I can invite you to dinner without any professional obligations," he replied without hesitation. "But I thought the job offer would be less intimidating and give you greater control over the situation." Brooklyn nodded, processing his words. It made sense. He was offering her a space where they could get to know each other while giving her the opportunity to withdraw at any moment. "I appreciate your honesty," she finally said, "but I need to know one more thing. Is this job real? Do you really need a consultant, or is it just an excuse?" "The work is absolutely real," he assured her firmly. "I need someone with your skills. If nothing happens between us personally, I'll continue to respect our professional relationship. You have my word." Before Brooklyn could answer, the restaurant door opened abruptly, and a woman in a black coat entered. Tall, slim, blonde with sharply defined features, she looked around the room, and when her eyes rested on their table, she moved in their direction with a decisive step. "So this is where you're hiding, Marcus," she said loudly, standing next to their table. Her voice was cool with a distinct French accent. Marcus looked completely surprised. "Sophie, what are you doing here?" he asked, standing up. "I could ask you the same thing," the woman replied, aiming an icy stare at Brooklyn. "When your assistant said you had lunch with a consultant, I didn't expect this." Brooklyn felt blood drain from her face. Who was this woman? She looked questioningly at Marcus, who appeared embarrassed. "Sophie, this isn't the right time," he said quietly but firmly. "We can talk later." "Why? Am I interrupting something?" the woman asked with feigned innocence. Then she turned to Brooklyn. "I'm sorry, we haven't been introduced. I'm Sophie Du Bois, Marcus's fiancée." Brooklyn felt as if someone had punched her in the stomach. Fiancé. She looked at Marcus, searching his face for confirmation or denial. You were my fiancée, Sophie, Marcus said, and his voice was icy. We broke off our engagement 3 months ago after I caught you with Richard. Sophie waved her hand dismissively. That was a mistake, darling. We both know we'll get back together. It's always like that. Brooklyn felt anger and humiliation growing inside her. She stood up, collecting her purse. I'm sorry. I think I should leave you alone, she said, trying to keep her voice confident. Brooklyn, please stay, Marcus said, gently grabbing her hand. Sophie is leaving right now. Don't be ridiculous, Marcus. Sophie snorted. What are you actually doing? First that Japanese girl from the Takeda contract. Now, she looked at Brooklyn with contemptuous disdain. Who is this? Anyway, Brooklyn felt something break inside her. There was someone else. A Japanese woman. Enough, Marcus said, and his voice was now cold as steel. He turned to Sophie. Leave, now. You don't have to ask me, Brooklyn replied, pulling her hand from his grasp. I'm leaving. She started toward the exit, ignoring Marcus's calls. She felt tears coming to her eyes, but she decided not to cry. Not here. Not because of a man she barely knew. Leaving the restaurant, she heard footsteps behind her. She accelerated, but after a moment Marcus caught up with her and stood in front of her, blocking the way. Brooklyn, please let me explain, he said, and genuine regret could be seen in his eyes. It's not what you think. What do I think? She asked coldly. You're a man who tries to impress me with a $12,000 a month job, while your ex-fiancé talks about a Japanese woman. Sounds like a pattern, Marcus. Marcus sighed deeply, running his fingers through his hair in a gesture of frustration. Sophie is lying, he said directly. There is no Japanese woman. She's trying to sabotage all my relationships since we broke up. Brooklyn crossed her arms across her chest, not entirely convinced. Why should I believe you? I've only known you a week. Because from the very first moment I've been honest with you, he replied. Even today when you asked about my intentions, I told you the truth. I haven't tried to hide anything. Brooklyn hesitated. It was true. He'd been honest with her from the beginning, even when it meant confessing personal interest. Why did she call me a consultant like that? She asked, still unconvinced. Marcus sighed. Sophie likes to create narratives that fit her vision of the world, he explained. In her head, every woman I talk to is a potential threat. My assistant told her I had lunch with a consultant, so Sophie immediately assumed the worst. Brooklyn looked at him, trying to assess his sincerity. In his eyes, she saw genuine remorse. And something else. Fear that he was about to lose her. I know this all looks bad, Marcus continued. But please, give me a chance to fix this. Even as potential collaborators, you deserve a full explanation. Brooklyn sighed, feeling her initial anger subside a bit. Fine, she agreed eventually. But not here. Let's go to the park. They moved toward nearby Grant Park, walking in silence. Autumn leaves rustled beneath their feet, and the cool wind reminded them winter was just around the corner. They found an empty bench away from the main paths and sat next to each other. Sophie and I were engaged for a year, Marcus began, looking ahead. We met in Paris during business negotiations. She's an architect. She designed one of my buildings. He paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts. 3 months ago, I returned early from a business trip and found her with my former partner, Richard. We broke off the engagement that same day. Brooklyn nodded, listening in silence. Then Sophie appears unexpectedly, claiming it was just a mistake, that we should get back together, he continued. The truth is, our engagement was a mistake from the very beginning. We were connected by passion and common interests, but nothing deeper. He turned to look at Brooklyn. And then I met you, someone who wasn't afraid to tell me the truth, who looked at me like I was an ordinary person, not a millionaire. It was refreshing. Brooklyn felt her heart soften, but she still had doubts. What about the work? Is it still on the table? She asked. Absolutely, he confirmed without hesitation. No matter what happens between us personally, the offer is genuine. I need someone with your skills. Brooklyn took a deep breath, considering everything she'd heard. Marcus had been honest, maybe too honest. He hadn't tried to hide his mistakes or the complications in his life. That said more about him than beautiful words or promises. Okay, she said finally. I accept the job, but we need to set clear boundaries. Marcus smiled. The relief on his face was visible. "What boundaries?" he asked. "First, we start only as co-workers," she explained firmly. "If anything more is going to happen between us, it must occur naturally, over time. No pressure." "I agree," he said without hesitation. "Second, I want an official agreement with all conditions and scope of responsibilities. Of course, Elizabeth will prepare all documents." Brooklyn nodded. "And third, you have to understand, I'll continue to help my father. His care is my priority." Marcus looked at her with admiration. "I understand and respect that. We can customize your schedule to make sure you have time for your father." They sat for a moment in silence, watching falling leaves. The tension between them began to give way, replaced by a calmer, warmer feeling. "So when do I start?" Brooklyn asked, breaking the silence. "How about next Monday?" he proposed. "That gives us a week to prepare all documents and plan your introduction." "Sounds good," she agreed. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then gently grabbed her hand. "Thank you for giving me a chance to explain," he said quietly. "I promise you won't regret this decision." Brooklyn smiled slightly. "I'll make sure you keep that promise," she replied, and there was already a note of warmth in her voice. As they walked back down the path toward the park exit, Brooklyn felt strangely calm. The decision she'd made was risky. She was entering an unknown world full of new challenges and opportunities, but somewhere deep in her heart, she felt this was the right thing to do. 3 months later, Brooklyn sat in a spacious office on the 20th floor of a Chicago skyscraper, reviewing contract documents with a Japanese company. Her new job as Japanese consultant for Olsen Investments had turned out to be challenging, but also hugely satisfying. She'd gone back to college, which she could now continue thanks to her flexible schedule and much better financial situation. Her relationship with Marcus had developed slowly, in accordance with the boundaries they'd established. It started with lunches together in the office, then came after-work dinners, and finally their first kiss after successful negotiations with Japanese investors. The phone on her desk rang. "Brooklyn, Mr. Nakamura is already in the conference room," said the assistant's voice. "Thank you. I'm coming now," she replied, gathering her papers. As she walked down the hallway, she thought about the irony of fate. It had all started with a Japanese tattoo with an error. Now, thanks to that mistake, her life had changed beyond recognition. Her father had better care. She was pursuing her passions, and a feeling was growing in her heart for the man who had once been just a wealthy customer in her restaurant. Before entering the conference room, Brooklyn stopped for a moment, seeing her reflection in the glass wall. She smiled at herself. Sometimes the biggest changes in life start with the strangest cases, or from an incorrectly done tattoo. She opened the door, walking with confident steps toward a new chapter of her life. 6 months later, the proposal. The Cherry Blossom Apartments' rooftop garden had been transformed for the evening. String lights twinkled above, and cherry blossom petals, specially flown in from Japan, floated in the gentle spring breeze. Brooklyn stood at the railing, looking out at Chicago's night skyline, wondering why Marcus had asked her to meet him here so urgently. He'd said there was something important he needed to show her about a new project. "Brooklyn," she heard his voice behind her. She turned to find Marcus standing there in the suit he'd worn to their first meeting at the restaurant. Navy blue, perfectly tailored, but his expression was different now. Nervous, hopeful, vulnerable. "I brought you here because this is where everything changed for me," he started, walking closer. 6 months ago, in, that apartment below us, I asked you to take a chance on working with me. You set boundaries. You demanded honesty. You made me prove I was worthy of your trust." Brooklyn's heart began to race. "Over these months, you've transformed not just my business but my life," he continued. "My Japanese partnerships have never been stronger. But more than that, you've shown me what it means to have a real partner, someone who challenges me, who sees me as more than my bank account, who tells me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "You told me once that my tattoo was a mistake," he said with a slight smile. "But meeting you, that was fate disguised as a mistake. The best thing that ever happened to me." He opened the box, revealing a stunning ring with a blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds, the exact color of his eyes. "Brooklyn Lawson, will you marry me?" Brooklyn felt tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered, Then, louder. Yes! Marcus slipped the ring on her finger and pulled her into a kiss. Deep, passionate, filled with promise. When they pulled apart, Brooklyn laughed through her tears. You know what's funny? What? Marcus asked, holding her close. That tattoo you were so proud of, the one that said, "Fool pays double," it was actually telling the truth in a way. Marcus looked confused. How so? Brooklyn smiled, touching his face gently. Because you paid double for that tattoo. Once with money, once with embarrassment. But in return, you got so much more than you bargained for. Marcus laughed. That same genuine laugh she'd first heard in the restaurant. Best investment I ever made, he said, kissing her again. 1 year later, the University of Chicago graduation ceremony was packed with proud families. In the front row sat Theodore Lawson, healthier now thanks to better medical care and new treatments, next to Marcus Olson. There she is, Theodore said, pointing as Brooklyn O. walked across the stage in her cap and gown to receive her degree in East Asian Studies. Marcus beamed with pride, recording the moment on his phone. When Brooklyn received her diploma and looked out into the crowd, their eyes met. She mouthed, "I love you," and he mouthed it back. After the ceremony, as they celebrated at the Fountain, the restaurant where it all began, Brooklyn raised her glass. "A toast," she said, "to mistakes that become blessings, to tattoos that change lives, to fathers who believe in their daughters, to men who value honesty over flattery, and to knowing that sometimes the wrong tattoo leads you to exactly the right person." Everyone clinked glasses, and as Brooklyn looked around the table, at her healthy father, at the man who'd become her husband 2 months earlier, at Elizabeth Novak, who'd become a dear friend, at Mr. Nakamura, who'd flown in from Tokyo to celebrate, she marveled at how one moment of honesty had transformed everything. Marcus leaned over and whispered in her ear, "By the way, I finally got that tattoo removed." Brooklyn laughed. "What? When?" "Last month. I wanted it to be a surprise," he said, pulling down his collar to show smooth, unmarked skin. "I figured our story deserves better than starting with 'Fool pays double.'" Brooklyn kissed him softly. "I don't know," she said with a smile. "I kind of liked it. It reminded you to never be too proud to hear the truth." Marcus pulled her close. "I don't need a tattoo for that anymore," he said. "I have you." And as they sat there in the restaurant where a waitress had once dared to tell a millionaire the truth about his ridiculous tattoo, Brooklyn knew that sometimes the best stories begin with the courage to speak up and the wisdom to listen. If this story touched your heart, remember, honesty is the most valuable currency in any relationship. That moment when you choose truth over comfort, when you risk saying what needs to be said even to someone powerful, that's when real connections begin. Brooklyn could have stayed silent, but she chose integrity. Marcus could have been offended, but he chose humility. Together they built something real on a foundation of truth. Share this with someone who needs to know that speaking up matters, that being authentic attracts the right people, that class differences don't matter when two people genuinely see each other. Subscribe if you believe in love that starts with honesty, in second chances for those who deserve them, in family sacrifice being rewarded, and in tattoos that change destinies. Because sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to tell the truth, and one person humble enough to hear it, to start a love story that will last forever.